evening, everybody, and thank you for coming tonight. My name is Norm Findley. I'm the chair of the Board of Trustees here at Oglethorpe. Our son Brian is a 1999 graduate of Oglethorpe. I'm also a veteran of the Vietnam era. Served 4 years as a naval officer during 1966 to 1970. And so I'm going to moderate our panel tonight. But what I'm hoping is that we can just have discussion back and forth ongoing. We're a small group, and that everybody can ask a question when you want or make a point when you want, and we'll go from there. And so what I might ask, I'll start on the opposite end with Fred Agel, and just ask if everybody maybe introduce themselves, tell a little bit about their military experience, and a little bit maybe about life after and returning to life after, and we'll go from there, Fred.
The life after is Oglethorpe University, so I don't have to say much, but I got in right after the end of the conflict, but the war hadn't been declared officially over, so I am categorized as a veteran of the Second World War. I did go to the Philippines and had the distinction when I first got there was guarding Japanese prisoners, and ended that after about a month and became the head of the radio section of G4. And from that, I got to drive the general that is in charge of G4, General Frank A. Heilman, who had been a buck private for 5 years, so he really appreciated the fact that he was a general and how he arrived at it. But also the fact that I had to drive General MacArthur for 3 days. They flew over General Heilman, and I had a 1939 Plymouth sedan, which wasn't good enough for MacArthur. They flew over a Packard car, and I was responsible to see that it was repainted and restored and what have you. And be honest with you, that's he has a distinction in my heart of being the worst human being I've ever met.
You need to know me better. You don't know me well enough.
But I did get my discharge, and the Army was I got $300 as severance pay, I think it was, that allowed me to buy a 1935 Oldsmobile automobile that used 24 quarts oil. And what head gasket getting from New Jersey down to Oglethorpe University. Here I am.
Oh my God. You still have that car, I hope. No?
My name is Jeff Palframan. I am a senior here at Oglethorpe. I'm currently the president of the Oglethorpe Veterans Club and president of Omicron Delta Kappa. I'm an Afghanistan veteran. I was deployed to Afghanistan in 08-09. It was only for about a term of 90 days. My combat experience is somewhat limited, pretty much equated to waking up 3 o'clock in the morning with the worst alarm clock in the world, and running with my helmet and underwear towards a shelter. So, but I wouldn't trade the experience that I had over there for anything. It was an eye opener to as to exactly how the world works and how things are different. When I got out of the Army, I had served in the Canadian Army as well for about 6 years before I had joined the U.S. Army for 4. I was a lieutenant up there for a while. They were some of the best years of my life. I founded the Oglethorpe Veterans Club here at school after returning. We had a Veterans Day. There was a Veterans Day came along in around 2010, and I didn't really see anything happening on campus, and I didn't really see anything. I didn't really see that memory being kept alive. Not criticizing anybody for it, but I took it upon myself and a few other friends to actually start this club up and get it going to raise awareness about this and to make sure that these memories are never forgotten. So that's why.
Hi, I'm Tom Reilly, and right after graduating from Oglethorpe University in 1967 with a business degree, I found myself in the infantry in Vietnam.
Wow.
Yeah, wow was right. Yeah, talk about a contrast. I served with something called the 199th Light Infantry Brigade. And basically, we were in South Vietnam, here between Saigon and Cambodia, the Mekong Delta, etc. I spent half my tour as straight infantry. I worked my way up from ammo bearer to radio telephone operator. And the last half of my tour, I became a war correspondent for the United States Army and my own boss for 6 months. While I was there, I received the Bronze Star, 2 Purple Hearts, and a Combat Infantryman's Badge. Learned the Vietnamese language. Came home 2 miles from here, walked into my mother's living room, and on TV I saw men walking on the moon. It was July 20th, 1969. That's when the transition back to civilian life officially began.
Well, I'm Charles Shepard. I'm an Atlanta native. I went to Atlanta Public Schools. I went to North Georgia College. I went to Georgia Tech. I joined the Army, getting the advanced ROTC program there to get commissioned. And they called us all to active duty and sent us to OCS. And I graduated on December the 28th, 1943, at the age of 20 as a combat infantry officer. I speak to high school students and point out to them that when I was commissioned as second lieutenant, I was just a few years older than they were at that time. And I was assigned to an infantry company in France in about July the 15th, 14th, 15th, sometime around that. We didn't keep diaries for some reason or other. They said infantry soldiers don't keep diaries. They might get captured. That gives away too much information. So a lot of this I have to remember. And as I grow older, the memories get broader and broader. But I enjoy that because I speak quite frequently to groups. I spoke for 30 minutes noon today to a group. I'll speak next Sunday maybe for 45 minutes. I spoke last Thursday about my experiences in World War II. And I could take up the rest of the evening because, as my wife says, when I start talking, I don't remember how to stop. But I was wounded once in France and once in Germany. I did receive a couple of Bronze Stars, and the last time I was wounded in Germany, I was involved in a situation where I received a Silver Star. Later, after the war was over, the infantry school has a Hall of Fame, and I was elected to the Hall of Fame at the infantry school in Fort Benning, the United States Army OCS Hall of Fame. And in July of this year, I got a letter from the French government saying that I was being awarded the Legion of Honor. I was a Chevalier of the Legion of Honor of France. They were awarding this medal to most anybody they could find that had served in France during World War II. I think they were trying to get back into our good graces. Says, "Good morning. How are you this morning?" And so after the meeting is over, if anyone wants to see what a French Legion of Honor is, I have it in my pocket. You don't wear it, I understand. You are supposed to wear this little red tab, and in France, people run around with this and everybody knows, oh, he's a Legion of Honor. And in the United States, the people look at it and say, what kind of bird have you been? But of course, when I came back, I had not gotten a college degree, and I came back, and although I could have gone back to Georgia Tech and got an engineering degree, there were no girls there. That's why I went to the University of Georgia and got a business degree and a wife. And we got married, let's see, we graduated from college one weekend, got married the next weekend, and the next weekend we sailed from New York with an international student trip. Well, first we had gone to Europe, we were there for the summer, and the World Student Service Fund. When I came back out, took advantage of the Bill of Rights, and as I was concerned, there was no problem in drifting back into normal life. It was just, it was a little different, I think, in World War II than in our more recent fights. Once we joined an infantry unit, you were with it till the war was over. And I say this because this business of going, working for 6 months, coming home and going back, children in the high schools asked me, said, weren't you ever afraid? And I said, well, I'm sure I must have been. But I can tell you this. I was joining an infantry company on line. I was wounded, and I came back to join that infantry company on line. I got a 72-hour pass to Paris. That's another story. And I had to come back and join that infantry company on line. And I was wounded the second time. And then I had to come back to join that infantry company on line. And the stress of going back, knowing that I was going back into harm's way, was much more a strain than being in combat and knowing that you're under rifle fire or artillery fire or whatever it is. It was no comparison between the two. And long after the war was over, I thought about it and I realized that as infantry soldiers, we thought the Air Force, bless their hearts, had it so easy. They had soft billets, they had soft beds, they had steaks, they had fine foods. They were close to English pubs and English girls. And maybe a couple of times a week, they would go on a bombing mission. And then I suddenly realized that quite probably every one of those men who went on that bombing mission, every time they went on that bombing mission, had the same stress and strain that I had when I was going to return to my unit, which I knew would be back in the harm's way. But I don't have much to contribute as to getting back and adjusted. And as I said, we went into combat. We did work for 6 months, come home, maybe 6 or 8 months later we'd go back. Of course, that was what the Marines did in the Pacific. They didn't stay in combat. They all came home, went back to Hawaii, retrained, regrouped, went back. So the strain was different. And I think that the GI Bill of Rights had a lot to do with it. We had something to do. We knew what was going to happen when we came back. Most of us went to school. I know that when they announced the GI Bill, I was talking it up. Here I was in my early 20s, and there was a captain there who was 34, married and had children. He says, that's all right, but what's it for me? I'm not going to go back to school. Of course, there were a lot of other benefits we didn't know about then. We just knew we were going to be able to go back to school and be paid to go to school. Like I said when I started, I'll talk all night. That's all.
I think a couple of things that'll come out is that as each of us got out of the service at different times,
Yes.
The world was in a different place.
Right.
And the U.S., I would think,
Yeah.
at the end of World War II, everybody was joyous, everybody glad to see the troops home.
Right.
You know, whereas I would say, when we got out at the end of Vietnam, people were not, well, a lot of people didn't support the war, and consequently, they didn't always support the military, which is even a difference I see today. People who don't support the war still support the military, it seems to me today.
I'll let this lady do her introduction.
Sorry, Margaret, I didn't,
No.
yeah.
Chime in on that.
Yeah.
Well,
one memory I retained, which is, I remember the Sunday that, of course, we didn't have TV, but on the radio, we heard that the Japanese had struck Pearl Harbor. We didn't have even thoughts of anything like that happening. So anyway, moving right along, I went in the Navy and had a very interesting, I was commissioned to a ship, and I ended up in Shanghai, and it was the scariest thing. We were always afraid that they weren't supposed to, we were big and white with big red cross on, and they weren't supposed to touch us. But the Mercy had been hit, and everybody was killed in surgery, so we always had that fear. But anyway, the other most scary memory was that we were coming into Okinawa, and they said there's a big typhoon, and they sent us back out right into the eye of the typhoon. And we were tossed up like a paper bag, and many ships were lost around us. We couldn't help them, of course. But the one interesting thing, one of the doctors aboard was Katharine Hepburn's brother. And he just got down on the water was coming in, and he just got down the deck and he said, "Take me." And anyway, we had then a year and a half, and we were out on the Wangpu and into Shanghai, and it was really quite interesting, especially if you get home safe. That's it.
Margaret, tell him, she was a Navy nurse, and she was on a Red Cross boat, so that she was the nurse with, and that's why she said they were always felt like they were protected, but then when the Mercy got hit, they knew they weren't always protected, so they, you know.
One nice thing too is one of my fellow Navy mates she's in Seattle, and we're still close friends and keep close contact. And I'll be 93 in February, and so will she.
So you were on board the Repose?
Yes.
And, in
Yes,
the
I was
Pacific,
on the commissioning detail on it.
in the Pacific?
Yes,
And-
yes.
and-
They sent us into New York, and then we'd have to report over in Brooklyn every day. And then when it was finally commissioned, and you know, the Navy did things up quite splendidly. They knew how to throw a good cocktail party. And so we went out through the Panama Canal, and from then on, and we got home safe.
And did the hospital ship follow island to island as the
Yes.
Marines went? Or?
This is what this was our main duty, to bring them back as far as Pearl Harbor. There was, then we were supposed to go to Russia for some reason, but then they sent us to Shanghai. And so I was in Shanghai out in the Wangpu for a year and a half. And so when you get home safe, it was very interesting, the whole thing. A little scary sometimes.
Yeah, yeah.
So.
Well, I'll say too that talking about the two gentlemen on my right here, when somebody tells me they were in the infantry, that's a different experience that I had as a naval officer. And so people say, did you serve in Vietnam? The answer is yes, I did. So did Tom, but it was a different thing. Some of my best friends they were in harm's way daily. You know, we were in and out. And I shouldn't be. I'm supposed to moderate, not tell stories. But one of the things is because I'd gone to Notre Dame, they decided I should be the Christian chaplain aboard. We didn't have a chaplain aboard the ship. And so ship left Long Beach, and first Sunday I had like 3 people show up, you know, and second Sunday like 10 showed up. third Sunday, I had like 20. And I said, maybe I've missed my calling here in life. I should have been preaching. We got to Vietnam, and as we're pulling away, the next Sunday I had 3 again. So I realized it wasn't my preaching, it was proximity to Vietnam, was how many people would show up for church. But, the point I started to make before, Tom, was that it was a different world, and it was a different world when we got out. As I said, I had really good friends who disagreed with my serving.
Well, it really was a different world in many ways. This was the 1960s, so you're talking 2 generations and more ago. I nearly got myself killed 7 different times. Obviously, none of them were successful, but twice they got better at it. And I remember coming home, of course I mentioned on July 20th, 1969, and went to sleep, long journey, everything else. And I remember there was another Vietnam veteran, more decorations than I do. He had the house right across the hill from us, literally, right down the street here. And a bolt of lightning hit a tree. Now, that's no big thing for somebody who's not been in a war zone, but immediately I woke up thinking we were under rocket attack. My friend was already awake. He went right under the dining room table and took half of the dinner with him. You just do that. And for a while, in World War II, in Charlie's time, it was called combat fatigue. In our day, we were calling it delayed stress reaction, and now the common name for it is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And that basically is just the leftover, so to speak, the ripples left over from the combat experience. When you get back into civilian life, the emotional adjustment is the first one, really. Then there's the financial adjustment, so to speak, learning about GI loans and GI bills, etc. And I think, too, you also have to, how do I pay it exactly? Eventually, you begin to realize what lessons there were to teach you for being in the service. But it leaves its mark on every last one of us. I still, to this day, wish everybody in this country would wear this uniform once, if only for one day, because it does make an enormous difference when you actually put your life on the line for something bigger than yourself. One of the lasting things that we had, as far as the readjustment to civilian life, was that we get the concept of service, literally payback, over and over. I serve in 3 different boards of directors, including this one. I work with the National Wildlife Federation. You're one of our habitats. And it gives a great deal of satisfaction to have that become part of your life, and I think that's probably one of the biggest benefits you get from the armed forces. But it has its moments. Sorry. Some of it never go to war. But that's Spanish fight.
Well, as just an 18-year-old, I totally believe in compulsory military training, even today, because just, as you say, just one day serving your country can make all the difference in your maturity in life.
It changes your sense of perspective. Who cares about the big house and the fancy car? You've got your family, your friends, your principles, your contributions. There's not a lot else you really can leave behind.
I always tell, we have 3 sons, and I always tell the boys, I grew up so much more in the 4 years. I went to college and then into the Navy. I grew up so much more in those 4 years in the Navy than I did in 4 years of college. I tell a lot of the students here at Oglethorpe, because I had a very nice career, but in college I was a doofus. There's no better word for it, in terms of not really appreciating what I was getting. And after that military experience, I appreciated everything. I appreciated the education, I appreciated our country, I appreciated certainly my family, which I think I appreciated before too, but it all gets stronger, as you're saying. What about, did just anybody feel that going back into the job force, did you get credit for your military experience?
Well, let me wrap up mine, let's let other people talk too, please. You and I were kind of unique. We were, pardon the expression, the black sheep of the military for a very long time. No other group of veterans faced exactly what we faced when we came out. And we weren't so much abused, although that did happen, but we were ignored. Nobody even cared enough to get mean with us. And it stayed that way until about 1982, when the Vietnam War Memorial was begun and finished in Washington. From that time on, it got better and better. But the emotional backlash for us was horrific. Nearly 60,000 of us died during the war. Did you know that another 180,000 of us killed ourselves after the war? Suicide, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, Agent Orange, exposure. A lot of us were homeless. And over 300,000 of us got wounded. And many of us permanent. So again, the price was paid. It means so much to us just to hear 2 words, thank you. That's all we ever asked for. And finally, that's what we are getting.
Jeff, what, in terms of re-entry, you've taken a unique step, sort of going back to school.
I think the a few things about, like, as Fred was talking about, and as Tom was talking about, that the military is a different world. And I mean, I wish that there was a way that outside of, you know, the video games and the television shows, that people could understand what military life is all about. You know, those are the fun 10% of the time that you see. But when you really get down to it, and you really actually have to, like, you do things that you put somebody else before yourself. That's a concept that I think that a lot of people would benefit from. And I think that that's a concept that's very hard to transition into back into civilian life. I think it's hard to start off a conversation or even a meeting or something where the objective of the people in the meeting is not the higher objective that you have in your head. They're there for personal reasons. They're there for their own benefit, you know, and to you want to get down to business and you want to start doing things, but not everybody else has that objective, and not everybody else is willing to take to do that sacrifice, you know, to not either not take the credit, to not you know, profit from it, you know, to give. And I don't think that can. It's a hard thing to explain, and it's a hard thing for people to actually understand and to get. And I think that's one of the hardest things that I get. That, you know, not knocking any of our students, because I think our students are awesome. Sometimes it's you're working with a different set of values, and I wish sometimes that there was a way to transition those values to the people around you.
And also the responsibility you have. Right?
Yeah, you're responsible for the people around you. Like, I mean, it was weird the other day. I think we were at an ODK meeting, and one of the girls was like, I won't be here. And I said, well, where are you going to be? And she's like, why are you asking me that question? And I'm like, well, that's because I would want to know where you're going to be, because I'm always looking out for the people around me. But she kind of took that as, are you stalking me? And I'm like, no, I'm not stalking you. I actually just want to know, you know, as a person in my group, you're part of my family, so therefore your benefit is my paramount concern. And a lot of people were like, had to get used to that idea. So I think it's.
Did you continue as a nurse, Margaret, after the war? You did.
Yes.
Did you? This is something that I think, so I won't even ask. It took me a long time after I got out of the Navy to be given nearly as much responsibility as I had been given while I was in the military. No?
I didn't feel, no, I didn't notice that.
Mm-hmm. Maybe because you had such a specialized skill as a nurse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah, in the Navy as an officer, you have more command, you have more responsibilities. I know that when my youngest son went to Sandford University, the ROTC spoke to the parents and says, encourage your children, students to get into the ROTC. Says, we recently had a graduate as a lieutenant who went to the Air Force. And in 2 years, he was the fuel supply officer on boat base. And he was responsible for 80 million gallons of gasoline going into airplanes during the year. He says, now, where else did anyone coming out of school have that responsibility within 2 years? And of course, as I said, coming back, and I went to the University of Georgia, and I was drawing, I was under the GI Bill of Rights, but I was under Public Law 16 because I was drawing a 10% disability allowance. And it paid about $30 or $40 a month, more than 346. 346, I think, paid $65 a month. And I think we got a little over $100 a month, and they paid for more. They paid for books that we didn't have. And I fooled around and got to be the proctor of the dormitory so that I didn't have to pay for the room. And I was a business major. They had a Bureau of Business Research, and they were asking people who would be interested in coming as a research assistant. And they worked, I don't remember how many hours a month, but I got $55 a month for that. And then they raised me to $77 a month. And I had more disposable income when I was a senior at the University of Georgia than I've ever had in my life.
I was just gonna add, you were talking about responsibility, and I mean, it's to coming out of the military, there's such a, you almost feel like declawed at a certain point, because you have so much, you have so much power and responsibility, and then you come back into civilian life, and you're sitting there and you're like, people are telling you to fill out forms, and you're just like, listen, I was just overseas and I could wipe out a grid square. So don't get testy with me, clerk, while I'm filling out this form, I mean, it's this transition. Like, I mean, I was an infantry officer in Canada, and I commanded 42 guys, and I was like, I guided their lives, and that was my job was. And then I come to civilian life, and I love my OBC people, but it's a very different world, and that's really hard to get. I don't know if that was your experience, sir.
Well, it's not so much a different world, I don't think. You're just a different person. Your perspective on that world is different. Again, your values are different, totally different. Second time I was wounded, I was the only casualty that walked away. I think the polite term for that is rearranging your paradigms. Try shredding everything you ever believed up to that point. And you just don't look at life with the same set of hierarchy. It's all there, but only a little bit of it's important. Again, your family, your friends, your work, your principles. Everything else, take it or leave it, literally. And a lot of us were that way, and I think a lot of us were better off for being that way. Sharpens your focus, if nothing else.
I guess it is. As an 18-year-old, I was put in charge of 21 people in the radio section at G4. And I had not the first managerial skill of my life. I just gotten out of high school. But I was driven that I had to succeed because of the pride of being in the service. And it did work out. It worked out.
I was thinking, I just trying to remember some dates in my mind. At the age of 24, I was managing 103 civilians at the Naval Supply Center in Long Beach. At the age of 39, I became a vice president of the Coca-Cola Company. Whoop-de-doo, big deal. I didn't manage 103 people again until I was over 50. I never had that much responsibility in my life as I had at the age of 24 in the military.
That's important, because
and that helps you, I think. As you say, sometimes you get frustrated by little things, but it gives you a level of experience I would have had to wait till I was 50 to get if I hadn't had the experience that I got managing that kind of people in the military. We had, we had roughly 50 people on the receiving floor. I'm going to get into trouble here. 50 people on the receiving floor who were all men, drove forklifts, slapped each other on the back all afternoon, and 50 women inside processing the receipts. And I had more actions and, you know, civil complaints, and, but it was a great experience. You know, managing that kind of a diverse workforce, and as I said, it took me a long time before I ever got back to that sort of level. That's where I was, you know, when I was asking you, Margaret, but as I said, probably, if I'd had any skill, it probably wouldn't happen for me either, but I just
Well, you know, one thing too you might find of interest, especially as, you know, the world gets older, so to speak, you've got what we call combat arms, people like me and Charlie, and of course you, excuse me. And
What was I hoping to get my infantry credit
that was
certified
not
here?
nice. Just like 2.5 of us up here. But combat arms has a different role now than it used to have. In Vietnam, for example, for every combat soldier, there were 9 other soldiers supporting that combat soldier. Now, if I have it correct, it's a long conversation, Jeff, for every combat soldier, there are now 99 other soldiers supporting that combat soldier. Technology, computers, all this other good stuff. So a great deal of the Army has to be, Napoleon used to say an army marches on its stomach, and now it marches on its computer chips, basically, in so many ways. But it puts a different perspective, too. Combat soldiers, how do you put it, aftermath of war, I think in many ways would be different from a non-combat soldier's aftermath of war. We all have the same basic struggles. And we all have to readjust to a life that we had to leave for a while.
There's one thing Tom said, that the object combat is to win. And the way to win is to defeat the enemy. And if you can wound the enemy, not kill, but wound the enemy, then you've got those 9 people that have got to take care of him as a wounded soldier. And that's 9 people that won't be in the firing line fighting you. Of course, I'm not quite sure how the infantry works these days. It could be I would ask somebody coming back from Afghanistan, how does the infantry work this year now? And he might be a little hard pressed to tell me exactly how they work this year now, because when I've read, they'll have a son that'll go out, come back, and they are in danger of mortars and rockets.
It's a very different style of warfare.
That's right.
Our wars have changed, and war nowadays is it's what's commonly known as like low intensity conflict. What you gentlemen experienced was definitely like a high intensity conventional army against conventional army, but nowadays it's a political battle in a military world, and inflicting casualties, getting the reports on television, attriting the political will of the people is the objective of the enemy, because they know they can't beat us conventionally, so they have to turn to tactics that we necessarily in our minds wouldn't consider honorable, but and I'm not saying them as I'm using a general term, I'm not specifically pointing at anybody here, but if you can inflict casualties and horrify the people on the TV, then you can nowadays win war. If you can break the political will of the people, and I mean, look at Afghanistan. Afghanistan's still going on. It's been 10 years. We've never had a conflict this long in the history of the United States. And if you can break the political will of the people, which I think the enemy has effectively done in Afghanistan, then you can win this war per se. And it's changed, and the costs. Like, I mean, we have. I know we don't have as many troops and we don't have as many casualties, but we have a lot of veterans coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq, and they all have a lot of different experiences, and it's a very different place than what you gentlemen went through, and it's different. It's definitely different. That's all I can really say.
We worry a lot about the possibilities of what might still happen in Iraq, what may still happen in Afghanistan. One of their leaders, one of the insurgents leaders, made the remark once that the Americans have all the watches, you know. We have all the time. That makes me my blood run cold every time I hear it, because it's exactly what the Viet Cong were saying in a different language. In guerrilla warfare, well, the basic rule, of course, is never start a guerrilla war in Asia. For us, that's kind of a moot point at this stage of the game. But it's not tactics or strategy that matter that much. It's time. They've been there for hundreds of years at least. They're going to be there for hundreds of years after we go. And believe me, they know it. So they wait, like the Viet Cong did. They hit you with a lightning fast ambush or some booby traps. Now they call them ICDs. They stir the pot some more. They wait. We go all over the place spending our energy, our money, and our time. And they throw in a few more booby traps and a few more ambushes and wait some more.
Which may have cost them $100, whereas it costs us $1 billion a day to run a conflict.
Exactly right.
And you know what is so provoking to me is the fact that the United States knew that the Russians tried to control Afghanistan for a good number of years before they says, forget it, we're moving out. Of course, a lot of the people say that the reason for that is the Americans were arming the Afghanistans. We were finishing with arms. And that was the reason they were able to fight so well against the Russians. But no, it's like you said, time. We'll just hold you down, pin you down here, pin you down there. We're not concerned about the land you take. We come back in and
It's
take
not
care
going to
of
go
it.
anywhere.
That's right. Great stuff.
Do any of you use the VA hospital?
No, actually.
I do.
I do.
Yeah.
I've been doing it for several years, and you know, I get much better care at the VA hospital than any independent doctor that I know. Yes, I'm just proud of the service, but it's appalling to see crowds of people there now. And the number of women, it's amazing, the number of women getting treatment at the VA hospital.
You know, in terms of coming back into civilian, well, for those that are really in combat, there's the putting all of that awful thought behind you and moving back, you know, and then, but for the 99 that are supporting the one at this point, there's still a heavy transition. And I think they must be coming out with a much different skill set today. Very technically qualified.
And there's very specific problems with that. And I think Margaret, she can probably talk about this too, is that when, say like medics coming out of the Army who have been doing EMT services in combat zones, if you're a veteran or you're coming out of this like very specialized field and you have qualifications that are military qualifications, there is no civilian equivalent. There is no process in place for you to actually get your qualifications transferred over. So what happens is that you come out as a nurse and they'll be that's fine, but we only accept people with this civilian qualification. So you have to go back to school for another 2 years, get that civilian qualification again, come back out. You know, this happens in the cases of EMTs.
Really?
Yeah, and this is one of these things where I was actually talking to David about, and this is one of these things where we as an institution can definitely help. We as an institution can actually, can we set up something where we can, either career services or something, where we can actually help veterans navigate this system so that they can get all the qualifications that they have and get those qualifications into the civilian world.
Jeff, aren't you lobbying for kind of a class that is a first step for that?
Yeah, David, he's, you don't know David Dixon, he's this awesome guy over here. He's actually talking about, we're putting together something that, for like an FYS for veterans specifically, and there's a lot of real good reasons.
FYS.
First, like a fresh focus class, it's kind of a 1 credit introduction course to Oglethorpe, so.
That's a great idea.
So we have a transfer transitions for our transfer students, just even coming from a different university in Oglethorpe, there are some transitions you go through. So taking sort of that as a platform or a baseline and focusing it towards military with all the various things that all of you brought up this evening, and then for the 99 others out there and how it comes together from how do you translate the skill sets you have in leading, and also dealing with PTSD if may be in there, and focusing that into the civilian world, but specifically the world of higher education.
There's just one other point I'll add about that. Like, we talk about like combat arms, but there's a joke nowadays. There's no such thing as not being in combat arms. Recently, we had the combat infantry badge for a long time, but now the combat action badge is awarded to other arms who see combat, and that's actually that's a nod to the fact that there's no front line anymore within our conflicts. So what happens is that like, I mean, you see soldiers nowadays. Well, we've had 50 soldiers killed this year in training these other forces. Like, I mean, these are internal attacks that are happening within our military. So there is no front line. It's gone. These 99 other, they experience just the same kind of stress and the same kind of things that they go through. And like, I mean, they are, they're just being infantry anymore is not a guarantee of seeing combat. I'm a prime example of that.
Well, you're right. I know we used to tease the artillerymen about being rear echelon.
I was mortar, so just a little closer.
But thinking of that, I can remember talking, conversation we had when the war is over. Well, I'm an expert. I know all about the soils of Europe. I'm great. I know how to disarm, how to break down and put back together weapons. And I know that that's going to be of value to me when I get back to civilian life. But no, World War II, if you're going to be involved in coming back, that's the one to select too. And I said that when I got out of school, I went to work for the government. I was a labor economist for the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And then I was an industrial relations analyst for the Wage Stabilization Board during the Korean War. And then I decided that at that time, my boss told me I was probably higher paid than any other 48 a Georgia graduate, because I was earning $6,000 a year as a GS-11 in the Wage Stabilization Board. So I decided to go work for a living, and I looked for a job. I went to work for a small life insurance company. I thought my analytical experience would help me there on some things about insurance. There were 7 of us in the home office, the president, the janitor, and me. And so luckily, I was the chief underwriter for a life insurance company. I was in charge of all the purchasing. We had an old building on Peachtree, which was built in 1904. It had never really been refurbished, and so we had electrical problems, we had roof problems, we had plumbing problems, and that was my responsibility as the superintendent of the building, in addition to my other duties. And of course, I enjoyed the title of superintendent of the building because agents who sold life insurance, the policy couldn't get issued without my approval. I was the one who was the risk appraiser. I approved it. And you can understand why sometime when the fellow has worked very hard to make a sale, because nobody really wants to buy life insurance. They have to be sold. And suddenly the application gets into the home office, and this home office life underwriter either turns them down or rates it up highly. He's not a very popular fellow. And I knew, as superintendent of the building, when they came in looking for that home office SOB, it was me.
Norm, are we going to get around to letting them ask questions?
Yes,
Oh my gosh.
I think that's a good idea, Fred. Anybody have any questions or thoughts or things you'd like
What's
to
the
discuss?
story on the Mercy? You all seem to know about that. I don't know, what was the history of the Mercy?
Mine is good gold, so I'll keep mine
Okay.
strong.
That'll work out.
Thanks.
All those folks he's been taking.
She laughed awfully hard at that, didn't she?
Mother, he's asking a question regarding the kamikaze attacks. And the kamikaze attack that struck the Mercy, and what you may have witnessed from the repose in terms of the kamikazes.
I didn't get what you were saying, Jim.
He's asking you a question. You had mentioned the Mercy earlier, and the kamikaze striking the surgical room, the operating room in
Yeah,
the Mercy. What did you witness from the repose? What kind of fear did you all fear or feel from the kamikaze attacks?
oh, we never really trusted them, but they weren't supposed to do it. It was, but of course, you know, you couldn't trust anybody. And it was very upsetting to all of us, but it didn't happen to us, you know.
You were not in that area where the kamikaze was doing all the attacking off of Okinawa.
Yes, we were, we were always afraid of them.
Yeah.
And also, if you weren't aboard ship, you had to worry about mines.
Yeah.
They just, every place was kind of risky.
I think just being unarmed, I think, which virtually you were, if you were totally unarmed, was
Yeah,
frightening.
yeah.
Mother, you're with infantrymen there. When you were treating the infantry coming off of Okinawa, what kind of challenges were they facing? How bad were the wounds? What was going on in the battle?
Oh, very bad. When we also, aboard ship, we had space for those that lost it. Just lost it upstairs. Well, it wasn't any weakness, believe me. They'd been through enough to make them, but we had everything.
You know what you're saying there about battle exhaustion? I had that experience. The second time I was wounded, and I came back to, I guess, an evacuation hospital. We had all tents and I had a room full of wounded soldiers in there. I had one come to me that he couldn't get his boot off, and he had wounded his foot, and it was swelling, and there was no medical personnel. Nobody was doing anything. And I got provoked. Why aren't we taking care of our wounded? And I went out to find out what was going on. Well, of course, in retrospect, I know that they were doing what was the most efficient thing for them to do. They had someone had overrun a prisoner of war camp, and they had 5 or 6 truckloads of American soldiers who had been prisoners of war, and they had them off the truck and delousing all of them, and get them all moving on back. And I had told my mother, I wrote her and told her that if she got word that I was risen in action, to know I was dead, because I would not be taken a prisoner. And she wrote me back a sweet letter explaining to me that wasn't the right attitude to have, and explain why it wasn't. But I came out there, and the only thing I could see was all those wounded men not getting any treatment whatsoever. And I went up to the captain who was in charge, and I told him something of my dismay about the fact that you got hurt, bleeding men who continued to fight until they were wounded, and you're spending your time with all these quitters, which, you know, that was an unkind word to say, I realized later. But when he came back into the tent and they checked out everybody and he got to me, he found out that I didn't have a life-threatening wound. None of us had life-threatening wounds. So they were satisfied that they weren't creating a problem. And he wrote on a ticket and gave it to the nurse. And I was leaving with her to go out, and she kept looking at this sheet. Got there, the chief nurse, she called him over, had a look at it. And the chief nurse asked her 2 or 3 questions. I said, "What's the problem?" And she said, "Well, the captain says that you should go into the battle exhaustion ward." And I said, "You mean the Section 8 ward?" I said, "That's great. Send me in there, because when I get in there, then if I make a play for your nurses, it's because I'm battle exhausted." He says, "You go on back over there with him." So, but that was a field decision that I was suffering from battle exhaustion, because at the moment I talked to him, I was very exhausted about the treatment we were getting. But I didn't lose it all the way.
Jeff? I just wanted to comment on that a little bit, that the conception of, and when people talk about PTSD, I don't want, the first thing that as an infantryman is that what I would say is that I'm not trying to hold up my head or hold up anybody's hand and say this person's a victim. PTSD is not about being a victim. PTSD is a very real affliction that a lot of people suffer from, and I think that, especially in the infantry, that there was a saying, "Oh, you're hurt, take a knee, turn out, drink water, you'll be fine." That was the remedy for everything. Oh, you just had your head bashed in by this tree, okay, fine, that's no problem, take a knee, drink water, you'll be all right. And that's how you dealt with it, and that's how you had to deal with those things in the infantry. That's what your life was. But and I think that getting back into civilian life, I've started to realize that these are very real problems that people have, and the last thing that any infantryman would ever want to think is I'm standing up and saying that I'm a victim, and that's not what identifying PTSD is all about. It's about identifying a real problem that has been around for a very long time, and that costs people potentially their lives when they come back.
Well, as I mentioned, a lot of us killed ourselves after the war, at least as many as died during the war. And I'm counting alcohol abuse, drug abuse as a sort of suicide. But I think one thing that helped World War II veterans a lot was it took such a long time to come home again. They were on troop ships for a very long time, coming back across the Atlantic or the Pacific. And they were able to more gradually become civilians again. In my case, let's see, I was out of Vietnam in 24 hours. I was in San Francisco in 24 hours. And it was such a very big jolt, a lot of us didn't have a chance to acclimate ourselves to it. What they recommended for us was to go out and get, light warehouse jobs. Something somewhat physical, eat a lot of good food, sleep. But the most important thing from our standpoint, again, we're kind of unique, was to talk things out with somebody. Now, there wasn't anybody to talk to because nobody was interested. That, of course, is different now. But to give you an idea of how long that can last, they have something, how many of you have actually seen the wall, the Vietnam Wall Memorial? Okay. There's a line of trees in a park, there's a lawn, and then there's, of course, the memorial itself. We have up there what we call tree vets. They come all the way from wherever they're coming from, they get to the trees, and they cannot literally come out from under the trees to go see the wall itself. They have to turn around and go back. And so many of us have never even started the journey. A gradual orientation back into civilian life. There were no classes for us. We were given our discharge papers. I did get a steak dinner out of it, and sent home. And that was it. So the more education you have about re-entrance in civilian life, the better off we'll be. Again, we would have given a lot to that.
We think about really where the world has come since the late 60s in terms of awareness and treatment of mental illness in a much broader sense of the word. PTSD being just, I have a very good friend, really age mate of one of my sons, who she is married to a Marine officer. And you think about, you're talking about coming in and going back into combat again after being wounded each time. Okay, he comes home from Iraq and thinks, well, I made it, you know.
Yeah.
And then 8 months later, he's going back, you know, and this is just awful.
That's right.
People. It's hard to face.
And the other acronym too I'll throw out there is MTBI, minor traumatic brain injury. And what minor traumatic brain injury is that it's kind of like what a boxer suffers over a long period of time, bouts and fights and stuff. Eventually, you know, your brain cannot take the shock and the stress, and there are things like memory. I mean, if my wife was around, I would remember to come here tonight. But but those are the kind of things too. Like, I mean, I used to work around 1064s, and we would, that's an APC, and you know, some guy would just drop the hatch on your head while you're wearing a helmet. You're still wearing a helmet, and you still suck it up because you're that tough infantry guy. But after a while, those kind of injuries really add up. You know, and you see that in professional sports, and you see that in all kinds of things. So
You see that a lot more now, right? Because body armor is so incredible.
yeah.
People survive things they wouldn't have survived in earlier conflicts.
Yeah. And I mean, you can get when I was in the service, I remember they assigned me to do this lecture on MTBI, and you can actually get MTBI without ever, like, you can hit an IED, and the shockwave from the IED will not penetrate your vehicle, will not penetrate your armor, but the shockwave flowing through your body and flowing through your head can actually cause MTBI and these kind of things. And they're very serious symptoms, you know, headaches, dizziness, memory loss. That's a bad joke, I'm sorry.
But most of us have memory loss up here. One thing that might be of interest to you too, 60,000 killed, 300,000 wounded. The ratio between killed and wounded in Vietnam, late 60s, was 1 to 5. Now, the last I looked, Jeff, and I stand to be corrected, in Afghanistan and Iraq, it was something like 1 to 7. In other words, 7 wounded for every 1 killed, because the technology got better. We were able to save more lives, which also means a lot of people who normally would have died in combat lived for the aftermath of the war.
I even think it would be, you would have,
There's handicaps. Yeah.
you have around 250,000 wounded out of both wars, and you have around 5,000 dead out of each war, so 10,000. So you know, you do the math. It's the wounding is, you know, it's for real.
1 to 10 to 1, 1 to 10.
Yeah.
You know, you were talking before about classes here at Oglethorpe. I would also think having a group of people that were experiencing the same thing would be helpful, sort of like a posse program in terms of, you know, having, so that they can relate to one another. What are things that we can do? I mean, I do not have a family member returning from Iraq or Afghanistan, you know, but what are things that
I think that, and Tom will probably back me up on this one, is say thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Never ever let that happen again. What was done to the Vietnam generation should be, I mean, the lives that public shunning cost, and they cost lives. It was a direct correlation between those two things. That should never happen again in this country. Another thing too is to providing a safe environment where people can express that and have a support network around here. And I mean, I've tried to do that with the Veterans Club, but I noticed what veterans do is the typical thing that they always do, is that I can take it, I can deal with it on my own, I can do this on my own. And then what happens is that you try and outreach to them, and they don't even realize what's going on. When we had our initial conversations, we're sitting there with Alan Stewart. I was sitting there with Alan Stewart, and he was describing how he got back into civilian life. And I'm like, you mean somebody else is going through that? Somebody else is going through the emotions that I feel? And you're like, wait a second.
That's one of the hardest things, sorry to interrupt,
No,
that's one of the
go ahead.
hardest things. Is you have this feeling, well, especially again with our generation, I apologize for bringing this up, it's the only generation I've got. But you feel alone. I'm the only person who's having these flashbacks. No, you're not. Everybody went through the same experience, it's the same basic reaction. No one exactly the same. It was occurring to me too, when we first got into Vietnam, we had a week of orientation. You know, the climate, what you'd expect, what's a sweep, what's a patrol, what's an ambush. And they would take us through and give us the basics of what it was like to live in country. If they had just done the same thing when we left Vietnam and started to go back into civilian life, it might have cut down those casualties considerably. There again, we're in the middle of a very good educational institution. And that's one more example, I think, of the importance of education, too. Of course, hindsight's always 20/20, but this lets us move forward in the future more effectively if we know how to do it better.
So in recognizing that there is unquestionably a distinct difference between some of the things we go through in life in the civilian world, and myself having never served, so a big thank you to all of you on that note. But that also being someone that has been through depression and knowing that a lot of that comes from that feeling of isolation and feeling that I am the only one who has these feelings in dealing with this. What factor does that play in the role of, and Jeff and I kind of spoke about this a little bit, of that realizing that, you know, even if you didn't come from a military background, there are people that can still relate through having traumatic events and kind of opening up and sharing in those forms of a coming together between the civilian world and the military world that lets people know that, wow, what I've been through from driving down the street and encountering a traumatic event and taking a life, and what you've seen on the front lines, or having one of your brothers who you were the 99 supporting the one who was lost, and the feelings of survivor's remorse that come out of that. So all these pieces connect us on a much deeper level than at surface when we see well, there's war and then there's civilian world, and they're two separate places. And I guess in what senses did it help you guys, or had it come about, and being able to find that connection between those who did not serve, that had similar experiences?
Well, trauma is trauma too.
Yeah.
You know, there are common elements in there. But the fact that somebody's deliberately trying to kill you, you know, there's a little psychological rift in that.
Yes.
And it does leave its mark. It just does. I think you saw that with me earlier.
And the support network doesn't necessarily have to be military to military. It doesn't necessarily, like, I mean, it helps if somebody's a veteran.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, there was a very good, the NPR story, there was a very good, this was a woman who heads, I can't remember the name of the association, but anyway, she was transitioning back into college life. And she said that her base support was her academic counselor. And the academic counselor was the person that she went to the most, because, you know, she would start freaking out that somebody was texting in class, and I've been there. I mean, I wanted to light up a first-year student one time, and I was just like, I was like, you don't sleep in Dr. Bob Ross' class, I'll tell you that right now. But you know, and then she went to this advisor, and she had that moment, and then it's like, listen, you're not on the combat, it's okay. You know, and a civilian counselor can just as well provide that as well as a military counselor could.
Jeff, how long have you been home? How long are you gone and how long were you home?
I was overseas I was only overseas for 90 days. I was in 08, 09. I came back, left in October 08, and came back January 09. So, but I was in the infantry for 10 years, 6 years in Canada and 4 years down here. So it was a fun time. Krista came along right along with me. That's why.
And it's been about 2.5 years that she's been there.
Is that the question?
Charles, let me raise a question with your generation and then kind of pivot it to the next several generations. In World War II, coming back, and like David, I didn't serve. My parents served. But a lot of what y'all experienced has to be explained to us. And coming back, the media, as it was then, much of it was the movies. Very powerful movie when you came back, The Best Years of Our Lives. Seems to have had a tremendous impact in the United States. And I'd like to get a sense of what that movie meant to your generation, and then what could have been expressed in Vietnam, for example, and what should be expressed now.
I can't remember the first time I saw the movie. I've had an opportunity since then to see it a couple more times. And the last time I didn't watch it because I was tired of it. It seemed to be, to my mind, overdrawn. I'm sure that it was very, very true to fact and that sort of thing, but I had no connection with it. These people had their problems. I guess I had my own. And there wasn't anything I could do to help them. And it wasn't helping me to watch them go through their problems. But as I said, it could be, I don't know how other veterans were protected by it. It certainly had a great impact, as you say, upon the country and the civilian people, the civilians. But, and there's another thing about World War II. You'll talk to numerous people whose father or uncle or so-and-so was in the war. I said, but he never talked about it. Never talked about it. And I have to admit that I didn't ever talk about it until about 10 years ago. And my wife says, nah, you won't shut up. But by this time, I didn't expect to live this long. I'll be 90 years old on my next birthday, which is in May. I thought if I was lucky, I'd live to see the new year in the year 2000 come in. And so all this time in the last 12 years has just sort of been gravy years. So I'll talk.
One thing too, and again, if I'm talking too much, just raise your hands and say so. But the lifespan expectancy, our life, we see 80 and 90-year-old, 90-plus-year-old World War II veterans all the time now. Our lifespan is 66 years. I'm 67 and I'm getting really nervous.
Because of Vietnam?
Well, it's a lot of things. It was just the pressures put on us after the war, of course, the injuries, so many others suffered. But 2.3 million of us served in Vietnam. About a third of us are left, about 800,000. And we're dying off at the rate of 400, up to 400 a day. I've done the math too, Jeff, and that means within 10 years we should all virtually be part of American history. And that's a very young age. But again, there's that aftermath of the war to think about. It was very different in World War II.
Sure.
And different for us, and I think really different for you guys too, Jeff, really, to think about.
Yeah,
A lot better for you.
Yeah, it's, I mean, if there's any conflicts that I would, these gentlemen here, like, I mean, I don't think that there's any service that compares to what these gentlemen went through. I think that it was a completely, I don't put my service at all near these gentlemen's level. I think it's an amazing thing to even be sitting on the panel with these gentlemen. But just getting back to your question about media and all that kind of stuff, we just had a discussion night, and we had a gentleman named Alberti out, who's the father of Sharon Moskowitz. She works here at the school, and this gentleman, I wish he was here tonight actually, he received 4 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star with a V device, and a Soldier's Medal with a V device in 3 years of fighting in Korea. And we were setting up for the event, and he looked at me and he said, "I wouldn't wish this on anybody. What happened to me?" And to me that was, I was taken aback for a second, because here's a reluctant person who's able to do these extraordinary things, but it reminded me of the fact that at least for my generation, and even my friends in the military and stuff, we don't look at war as you gentlemen did anymore, back then. We look at it as, I mean, we're from the Xbox generation, you know? You can see the lecture that Elizabeth had me put on, and it's almost in a perverse sense that war is celebrated. And I find that disgusting. I think that war is the most heinous, horrible act that one human being can do to another. And that is part of the sacrifice. That's part of the thing where you accept that you're going to take a piece of your own innocence and put that aside for the benefit of the people around you, for the benefit of your nation, and for the benefit of the people that you're fighting for. And I think that it kind of disgusts me when I see things I agree with celebrating the soldiers, but don't celebrate the conflict. Don't throw video games in my face that, you know, that for after 1 second after another where you magically come back to life so you can go out there and kill more. I think that that's disgusting to me, and I think that it trivializes what soldiers go through.
That's really well said, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with that too. I understand that the average child, I do a lot of work with children with the National Wildlife Federation. They spend 8 hours a day in front of a computer screen and this many minutes, 4 of them, outside, for example. I guess most of that's waiting for a bus. They don't know how to use a rake, a shovel. They don't know that spiders make webs in the woods. They don't know that birds sing, some of them. But they know how to kill people. They do it several thousand times before they're in their middle school years in simulation. And it scares me to death. It is a whole different ballgame with military. There's a lot to think about. As I say, I wish everybody would wear this service uniform. You know, 24 hours isn't much, folks. But if everybody had it on just for 24 hours, I think a lot of our problems might start solving themselves.
I might ask, maybe we'll just ask Margaret, if I can start with you in a second, ask everybody if they have some closing remarks to make, a few words to say, and then if anybody else in the audience has anything they'd like to add, let's do that.
I just think this was very interesting and enjoyable.
Thank you. The same. I'll say what I said before about service too. You talked about service over the years, but even in Vietnam or World War II or whenever, there were different kinds of service. And when you meet people, infantrymen with Purple Hearts, Bronze Stars, Silver Stars, you meet people who did something. I lived in France for 5 years. The French do not give the Legion of Honor to just any American who survives. They don't even like to give it to French people. So if you meet an American who's got one, you've met somebody who did something. So it's a pleasure to be here with you two, with you gentlemen as well.
You got 5 minutes, Charlie.
Would you like to see one?
Oh,
Wow. Huh?
Oh, man.
Oh, great. You're aware, Charles.
We need to invade France so I can get one.
You know well, I've got my bird's eye over here.
Oh, come on. Nobody knows what that is.
That is gorgeous.
I've never seen one close.
We put it in the museum.
When did you get the
They had a presentation on September the 27th. I got a letter from France, that the president of France on the 19th, I think, of July had approved the presentation of the Legion of Honor. I didn't expect to get it. I take that back. I did expect to get it. Because I was told about it by a friend of mine who incidentally got one. He was in the first wave of the 29th Division on Omaha Beach. And I talked to Bob at the time and I said, well, what was your unit? And he said, well, I was in a special unit. And I said, well, what sort of special unit? He said, our unit was responsible for patrolling the beach and making record of the names of the 29th Division men who were dead on the beach. Wow. So he hasn't seemed to have had much trouble. He said they continued to do that for a while too, but anyway, he had them send me the application, and I looked at it and I said, yeah, that's like a fool with that. And then all the attachments, they wanted proof of what I was saying. And I figured I don't have time to do research to find all this stuff. So for about 3 months, I just let it sit. And then for about 3 months, I worked on all this, getting the information for them. Mailed it, and they said it would maybe take as long as a year for them to evaluate it because they'd have to go to Washington, and they would call them out, and then they'd have to go to France, and then France, they would have to approve them. And so I figured that I probably did as much to liberate France as most any other infantry soldier, so I ought to get it. But I wasn't sure. But closing words, all I can say is that in history, and when you read the Bible, you'll find that a lot of the history of the Bible is about wars and desolation. And life hasn't changed at all. We're going to continue to have wars and disputes, fights from here on. I see no way of there being world peace at any time. It's just a question of the only winners of a war are those who are alive after it's over. So I offer you that as all man's opinion.
Well, including remarks, I've never been a great big fan of what they used to call the Hare Krishna movement, where those people in orange robes who bother you at airports and stuff. But one of their leaders one time made a statement I think might sum up what you can get out of the military. Nobody ever ultimately wins or loses a war. You know, there's benefits and there's hurts on both sides. But the head of the Hare Krishna movement made a statement once that there is no life without surrender. And there's not, folks. You know Brad Smith, of course, he's a professor at Oglethorpe. Brad and Charlie and I all go to the same church. Brad's in my Sunday school class. Brad's brilliant, in case nobody noticed. And he made the remark once that there's an epidemic of selfishness in this country. And he's right. If anybody, pardon the expression, ever screws us over, it's going to be us, to us. You have a choice. You can live a life wrapped up in your own selfish desires, your own materialistic gains, elect the wrong politicians, promote the wrong celebrities, or you can live a life where there is no them. Just you, people you can help, us, we. It's your choice. And the military can help you make that choice.
I just want to say I'm very honored to be sitting up here with these gentlemen. I think that it's a testament to just how great this country can, and the individuals they can produce, most like the camera. But I'm very happy to be here and to discuss these things. And I would just say that, just remember, that's all. That's at the very least, remember. And remember the people that don't have the benefit to be here and discuss this with us tonight.
I'd like to add something. I'm here representing my husband. I lost him last year in the Marines. And he fought for this country. And I'm very proud of him. And what you said made a lot of sense. Because war is something that sometimes we can't help. We have to fight. We have to, I was surviving the Holocaust. Yes, and I can tell you right now that to me, this country is the most wonderful country in the world, and the sacrifices that people like you have made and my husband has made a lot of difference in the world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I teach here at Oglethorpe as well.
What'd you
Okay,
teach?
go to things to Wisconsin and
I visited Omaha Beach, and to see the firepower that was directed to canal, channel, whatever you call it, was absolutely appalling. And I firmly believe if we had had television back on D-Day, we would never have entered this war, because that was the most atrocious battle, in my estimation, ever. We would have revolted against it.
And you don't hear much about it, but it would not have been clear if it had not been from destroyers who came in, dragging their keels across the bottom and firing at the points. We have 4- and 6-inch guns to blow those points, pillboxes along out.
The last time we were in France, my wife and I, a year ago, and we went, took my mom, I said, I think I told somebody I was born on D-Day, June 6, 1944, so that, and my dad was already on his way to Europe at that time. And so we took my mom there, and there were a group of people from Memphis who had brought survivors of the invasion with their children and their grandchildren back to see, and it was just incredible. You know, and the men who were there, the grandparents that were there were the most incredible. One guy had been picked up, he got about 20 miles inland and was picked up and put into a POW camp. And his grandsons asked him about this. And he said something like, oh, the food was great. It was just, to be able to take something like that in stride, and not have it ruin the rest of your life. It's just remarkable, just remarkable.
Well, PW camps and PW camps.
Mhm. Yeah. All right. Anybody else? Thank you so much for coming tonight. Thank everybody for participating so much. Really